Tell me, why do you like video games? What keeps bringing you back? What keeps you playing? I feel like the answer's a little different for everybody. Most of the time, we can generally classify what constitutes as a good game for most people through theories on what makes good game design, good story writing, good music, etc. But if all this were objective, one of my favorite YouTubers wouldn't dislike one of my top 3 most enjoyed game genres. This goes for pretty much all types of art, really. And in a way, it's kind of beautiful. The stuff we enjoy, as well as how and why we enjoy it, can say a lot about us and our personalities. For instance, I've always been a games as art kind of guy myself. I'm the sort of person who plays games so I can listen to the soundtrack years after beating him and cry a hopefully socially reasonable amount. Even the most action-heavy, most story-dry games in my non-existent favorites list, and believe me, some of them are very much action-heavy and story-dry, still have some sort of aspect that makes me, I don't know, feel things, I guess. It's all about the feelings and the memories to me. I also really value the cool factor in games. If a game makes me feel like a badass for playing well, I'm all for it. On the other hand, I have a friend who primarily plays simpler indies, and whose favorite genre is rhythm games. And don't get me wrong, rhythm and indie games are awesome. And there's of course a ton of crossover in our tastes, but in terms of preference, you can definitely draw a bit of a line here. I'm probably more likely to love a story-driven JRPG with philosophical themes, or an anime-style 2D action platformer a la Mega Man Zero, while he may prefer a procedurally generated dungeon crawler with shmup mechanics, or maybe a deceptively simple but tough as nails 8-bit platformer. Again, not saying I don't enjoy those kinds of games, but just comparing one person's favorites to another, you can just kind of see that. I feel like people tend to somewhat favor certain aspects of games over others. And of course it can vary based on what stage of their life the person is going through, or simply whatever kind of game they're looking for at the moment. And this even extends to the reasons why we play the games that we do. Someone's favorite thing about Deltarune might be the excellent character writing, which we talked about extensively in a previous video, check it out! While another person might favor the game's Toho-like battle mechanics. It doesn't mean you can't like both. In fact, probably most people do, but I'm sure certain things that appeal to certain players simply aren't as interesting to others. And while most of the time, games can put these differences in an environment where they're negligible enough for us to define if a game is good or bad, sometimes things aren't so clear. This is my analysis, case study, and love letter to Sonic Frontiers.
Follow me, I'm standing on the border of everything. Listen close, can you hear the spirits sing lost messages of long ago? I'm here, reaching far across these new frontiers. With my life, I fight this fear. In my hands, I hold the ones I love. Walk forward through the cold tide. Always to new horizons.
If the last 10 years of the Sonic game series could be represented into a roller coaster, it would be sort of like this. The conversation around the series' supposed rocky transition to 3D has been so overdone that talking about the fact that it's been overdone has itself become cliché. The wounds of the disaster that was Sonic 06 can be felt to this day, and the decisions Sega took to mitigate that, in hindsight, probably weren't the best. First we got Sonic Unleashed, a great game with a few fatal flaws that might be a turnoff for some people. It was critically panned and ridiculed, Not necessarily because of those flaws, but simply because people thought it was weird. God help me if people had the same attitude towards every single delightfully insane decision Super Mario Odyssey made. Sega was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place back then. Make a crazy new ambitious game and be ridiculed for trying, or play it safe and, well, deal with the long-term consequences of playing it safe. They chose the latter. After Unleashed and The Black Knight were both received negatively, they started making games that were definitely good, I guess? Sonic Colors was an alright supplementary game for the Wii, a tad short and defo not the big next step for the series. Generations came after, and yeah, it was amazing, but it was also a 3-hour-long anniversary celebration title. Again, not much of a step forward. Then there was the weird fever dream that was Sonic Lost World. Then Sega took one of the most baffling decisions I've ever seen. They decided to create a westernized sort of spin-off reboot thing, Sonic Boom, and focused on it for like 2 years minimum. Sure as hell felt like 5, especially when consider how out of left field and basic Lost World felt beforehand. It felt like the last actual mainline game we had gotten was Sonic Generations, and if you want to disconsider anything that wasn't like shortness of movies out there, Unleashed back in 2008 felt like the last one. Also, it doesn't help that the Boom games are widely considered to be absolutely atrocious. Maybe if they were good, we'd be having another conversation here. A reboot doesn't necessarily have to be bad. If you've watched a certain other video I've made, you'd know that. Boom basically destroyed the goodwill the series had gotten back with Colors and Generations, and solidified the Sonic series as the butt of the joke when it comes to gaming discussion. The amount of times I've seen people just sort of assume basically every Sonic game is bad is kind of surprising, considering how popular the brand itself is. Then, 2017 came, and it looked like things were about to change. They didn't. Sonic Mania was an amazing game, arguably the best in the series, especially if you like the 2D stuff. But it really wasn't a step forward either. The game was a throwback to the good old days, made by an outside studio comprised of series fans who also happened to be incredibly talented game developers. And from the looks of it, it doesn't look like there are plans of a sequel for any time soon. And Sonic Forces was a disappointing... I was gonna call it a wet fart of a game, but even that is like interesting in how awkward it is. Sonic Forces was a dry, soulless, odorless fart of a game. In hindsight, that probably had to do with the financial failure of the Boom initiative, but for Sega to release what was essentially a budget game and advertise it as the newest, most bombastic title in their most well-known franchise was kind of baffling, especially when people already had a bad taste in their mouths after Boom. It's technically sound, sure, but the game basically plays itself, and I'm sure 11-year-old me could have written up something better for its story. Skip ahead to the 2020s. It had already been a surprisingly good while since Sonic Forces released, and rumors started circulating about whatever was next, especially after the series had gotten its first successful movie, with an even better one already on the way. Sega were keeping quiet, spreading affirmations about how they were taking the time and making sure it was good, quote, focusing on quality over quantity, which was actually really good news. As 2021 and 2022 rolled around, we started learning more and more about what eventually was revealed to be Sonic Frontiers. But here's the thing, while Sega were saying, promising, that this game was going to be good, as opposed to not, people were, of course, very, and I do mean very, skeptical. Cautiously optimistic is a term I've seen thrown around quite a few times regarding this game before its release. Well, of course, some people were very much excited for it. Just as many people, if not more, were skeptical. I mean, who can really blame them? I myself was seeing a lot of potential in the game and holding on to hope. But after we've been scarred so many times, especially on Forces' case, that bordered on false advertisement, of course people didn't trust Sega, especially after the exceptionally bad gameplay review by IGN. Saying this game had to fight an uphill battle is putting it very shortly. Even if the game turned out to be amazing in literally every aspect, I'm sure there would be detractors. I even joked about it when I predicted the game's Metacritic score on Twitter. But in the end, who was right? The cynical killjoys or the overly optimistic fanboys? The answer is complicated. So let's look at the game itself, shall we? The story opens on a dark night, as the infamous Dr. Eggman implants a machine into some sort of ancient pedestal. which sucks him into dimensions unknown. Cut to Sonic, Tails, and Amy on the Tornado, on their way to a place called Starfall Islands, until they're sucked into a strange portal of sorts, which immediately leads to the first bit of gameplay from this title. Wait a minute, this is just a tutorial stage from Sonic Unleashed, and it doesn't control the pass to boot. Also, why are they using green heliosphatics again? Like, come on guys, this has gotten old. This game doesn't give off the best first impression. Or last impression really, but we'll get there. This, my friends, is a cyberspace zone, and aside from having banger music, they are the stand-ins for traditional Sonic levels, as opposed to the big open areas the game is centered around. They are mostly lifted level designs from previous Sonic games, with also lifted visuals from previous Sonic games. So what's actually new about these? Well, mostly how they feel and control, and at least at first, it's weird. This is somewhere in between the Sonic Adventure titles and the boost games. It has a quote-unquote boost button, but it's really more like a sprint. It's not nearly as bombastically fast as the boost we're used to, and it doesn't damage enemies on contact. Plus, it's recharged over time, kinda like the stamina gauge in Zelda games. That makes a lot of the stages lifted from the boost games feel kinda empty and stretchy. Pressing the boost button on the air gives you a short dash. That probably should have been more visually different from the boost itself. I remember being ultra confused why I couldn't just keep up my boost on the air. Sonic feels overall slower than in the boost games, but isn't as tight to control as in Adventure 1 and 2. Momentum isn't at all simple to keep up either. Your jump makes you lose most of your forward momentum, and the homing attack has a ludicrously long rebound animation, making it more viable to just ignore enemies for speedruns. Turning around in the air also requires Sonic to make a whole 180-degree turn, instead of just instantly snapping to the direction you're facing. This causes it to be somewhat awkward at times, and again, breaks the gameplay flow. Some things in the open zones are not much better. The controls are infinitely improved, you can even customize them to your heart's content, but the physics don't exactly feel right. Sonic doesn't interact with all kinds of terrain very smoothly. There's a certain degree of jank to everything. And the previously mentioned messed up jump doesn't help things either. If you simply run up ramps, you have a chance of getting way more vertical momentum than if you jump off them. The same goes for rails. If you boost then jump off them, you get some insane distance, while normal on-ground jumping feels like it's actively taking distance away from you. The progression in the open zones isn't really streamlined either. So your goal is to collect the Chaos Emeralds to be able to fight the island's titans, and with that, according to the Sonimus voice guiding Sonic through the game, save Sonic's friends from being trapped in cyberspace. Most of the emeralds are scattered around in the open zones, and to unlock them, you need to open these vault thingies. For that, you need to get keys from beating cyberspace objectives. To be able to enter a cyberspace zone, you need to bring these gears to cyberspace portals. To get gears, you need to fight guardians, which are mini-bosses of varying difficulty scattered throughout the islands. In addition, some of the emeralds are locked behind story progression, which is advanced through interacting with Sonic's friends with enough memory tokens, which are small collectibles relating to each island's corresponding character. Memory tokens are also used to unlock extra interactions with each character, as well as with this weird little girl named Sage, who seems to be a villain of some sort. Are you still following? Once you get the hang of things, it becomes simpler. You use gears to get keys to get emeralds, and you use memory tokens to unlock character interactions, some of them being mandatory and also giving you emeralds. But I know that throwing this many systems on an unsuspecting player can be a bit overwhelming and lead to some confusion at first. It's a ton of stuff for a Sonic game. It also doesn't help that the newly introduced combat system you use to get the gears doesn't seem like the best at first. You can hold the parry for pretty much as long as you need, which makes me wonder why there are these parry challenges across the map. It's literally just holding down 2 buttons. Plus, early on, damage dealing is reduced to spamming the attack button or holding down the left trigger to spam this seemingly overpowered projectile attack. Another big problem with the open zones is probably the most immediately noticeable one: the pop-in. While the natural environment you run in most of the time seems to operate normally, all the floating platforms and rails in the map load in only when you're already pretty close to them. And it's not even like a fade-in or anything, they just pop into existence. It's weird and distracting. But who am I kidding? You've seen the title of this video, we both know I can't keep framing this as a negative review forever. But if you haven't played the game yourself, you may be wondering, how the heck do I love this apparent mess of a video game? Well,
I'm hanging on to the other side. I won't give up till the end of Welcome to the mind of a different kind, where we've been growing slowly. Think I'm on 11, but I'm on a 9. Guess you don't really know me. Running from the past is a losing game. It never brings you glory. Been down this road before, already know this story. It's time to face your fears. When your time has come and gone, I'll be the one to carry on. And you can throw me to the wolves, 'cause I am undefeatable.
this game is so fun! It's so cool and exciting and addicting and empowering and That's what I mean when I say you can't define a game's quality 100% objectively. First of all, I was neglecting some stuff in the last chapter. While the controls are, in fact, a bit awkward, and the physics a bit janky, once you get the hang of it, it feels so good. Kinda how I mentioned before, it's a bit of a middle ground between the boost and adventure styles. And what that means is this is either the most responsive, tight-feeling Sonic Boost game, or the fastest, most reaction-based adventure-style Sonic. While it does take some of each style's worst elements, it also borrows some of their best. It's been years since Sonic felt so good to control on the ground. I can actually take light, calculated turns at high speeds. It's insane! And that's the thing, right? A friend of mine who wasn't really into Sonic mentioned to me something along the lines of, "Oh, you only really like this game because it's the first decent Sonic game in forever." And like, honestly, yeah, kinda. I mean, of course there's much more to it than that, but like, clearly a part of me is happy that we finally got a new good Sonic game. Of course it makes me excited and positive. It gives me fuzzy feelings. It's rewarding to finally get a good game from one of my favorite franchises, especially one as ambitious and fresh as this one. The open zone structure fits the series super well and, dare I say, makes you feel like Sonic the Hedgehog. The freedom it provides is exhilarating, and as confusing as the momentum mechanics are, it's super fun when you get them right and fly through the zone like it's nothing. The gameplay structure itself is also very addictive. Once you get the hang of the previously mentioned flowchart of collectibles, it truly becomes like a fun sandbox to explore. You can jam platform challenges into each other and just flow through them like they're nothing. It's super fun! My play sessions in this game tend to just sort of spread from a few minutes and 2 hours, just cause I keep losing myself in this world, and the little objectives I set for myself. I complete a puzzle or get a collectible, and there's already another one on the horizon to keep me going. I ended up 100%ing this game on my first playthrough, even though I wasn't really planning to. I just did it because it was that fun to explore the world in this game. Even the cyberspace zones, which I criticized in the last chapter for a ton of valid reasons, are actually really fun. For as gimped as the jump feels, it almost gives this timing-based, rhythmic feel to the gameplay experience. If you want to get those faster times, you gotta remember to jump only when you need to stomp so you can get back on the ground as fast as possible, to air boost so you can compensate for your loss of speed in the air. Once you start memorizing the stages, you really start getting the flow of this gameplay loop and it becomes uniquely fun to speedrun. Even more if you take into account the new techniques players have been discovering. To me, the best and probably intended way to enjoy these stages is going for all the extra objectives. While the difficulty for getting S ranks varies wildly from level to level, with some of them being pretty easy and others being stage 1 too, I still find it very fun to go for everything. Honestly, I think it's for the best that some of these S ranks are very lenient, and that the red rings aren't really hard to find. I understand that making these easy removes the replay factor for the game as a whole, but you gotta take these in the context they're presented in. This is the first time collecting all the red rings, or getting an S ring gives you a tangible progression reward in a Sonic game. If you're going for everything, and I believe you should, having shorter stages that encourage being replayed only a few times to get all the rewards works way better for this game's open structure. You don't want to break the pace too much. Something I would maybe suggest to remedy this issue is adding an extra ultra difficult SS rank or something that doesn't give you any actual in-game rewards. But then again, some of these S ranks are actually pretty tough. Zone 1-2 was already infamous for that. But there were also a few other stages I had a bit of trouble with. Not too much trouble, mind you, but it did take me a few tries to get an S on some of them. Which, again, I believe is perfect. I swear, getting the flow of these stages is so fun that sometimes, even on stages with more lenient S ranks, I keep resetting just because I'm that much of a perfectionist. Well, it's perfect for that sweet clearing of all the missions in one go, am I right? This game is just pure addicting open platform goodness. Even the bring that little puzzles you do to open up the map work really well in that context. I don't want to spend tens of minutes solving riddles just to open a small portion of the map in a Sonic game. It needs to feel more like a checklist, it needs to keep the flow going. And after a while, even the combat does that too. As much as I complained about how it starts off, I gotta say the combat gets so much better so quickly. First off, just conceptually, I think the idea of putting a fast-paced combat system in a Sonic game is actually really cool. Of course, you don't want to break the pace too much. But at his core, Sonic has always been an action hero, and aside from cool parkour stunts, what he does best is kicking robot butt. The series wears its shonen anime influences on its sleeve. And I mean, you know what those are all about, right? Plus, just the very existence of this combat system shows how much Sonic Team was willing to push boundaries and try something new after the snooze fest we've been getting for the last 10 or so years. After unlocking just a few skills, the combat starts getting drastically more interesting. It's not deep per se, in fact it's pretty easy to break, but it's very satisfying to chain together lots of flashy combos. And it's usually presented in quick enough bursts, and is avoidable enough, not to feel monotonous. And it also leads to what's possibly the best part of the whole game. These freaking boss fights rule! In every main island, once you collect all the Chaos Emeralds and get through all the mandatory dialogue cutscenes with Sonic's friends, you can face off against its corresponding Titan boss as Super Sonic. And like, oh my god, these are so cool, like for real, it's just pure unfiltered rawness. Like yeah, just like the rest of the game, these can be a bit jank. But I can't hear your criticisms behind this loud, badass power metal!
We're on a mission, overdriving over all the competition, counting up the
That's what I was talking about earlier with the whole subjectivity thing. There are lots of holes in here. Sonic Frontiers is far from being the most structurally sound game out there, and I can certainly see why some publications gave the game like a 7 or 8 out of 10. It makes sense when you measure all the pros and cons objectively. But sometimes, and only sometimes, a game might just transcend these rigid objective flaws and become an amazing experience independently of that. No matter how many little issues I can find with it, it doesn't change the fact that this game left an impact on me. That its soundtrack has completely dominated my YouTube music recommended. That I decided to write a however long this is video about it. That once I realized I had to replay it for footage, I had no issue doing so and I was actually excited about it. That I'm actually interested in speedrunning it. That I keep watching other videos made by other people who also love the game, sharing stuff like what their favorite bosses are, or any sort of dumb fun discussion like that. It almost makes me feel like a kid again, being ultra positive and excited about my favorite franchises, without sweating too much about the nitty-gritty, just enjoying the cool moments and the positive conversation around it. IGN editor Seth G. Macy put it best in his article about the game. Our Sonic Frontiers review scored it a 7, which I think is perfectly reasonable. Yet in spite of its flaws, I honestly love this game. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it very much going in. I'm not a Sonic guy, I respect Sonic and love the Genesis entries, but beyond that, I don't have much attachment or love for the series. But I decided to give Frontiers a chance, and I'm not joking when I say it's on my shortlist for Game of the Year. Yeah, it has issues, but I'm having so much fun with it, I'm willing to look past its shortcomings. And the soundtrack is unbelievable! Seriously, how is this game not nominated for Best Soundtrack at this year's Keighley Awards? A crime, really. Now, I've seen people on both sides of the discussion. People who like the game, and people who don't. Before and after its release. And there are reasonable and unreasonable people on both sides. King K and Jay's reviews are both great video essayists who felt a little more pessimistic about it than me. And there are so many Sonic fans out there who try to force their positive opinions about it onto others to the point of toxicity. So I don't mean any harm to anyone specifically with what I'm about to say next, but how much do you think the state of the franchise itself affected the polarizing reception of Frontiers? How would we feel about it if it released back in the 2010s instead of Boom or even Forces? It's just like what happened with Pokemon Sword and Shield back in 2019. A fairly average, if a bit underwhelming Pokemon game in most regards, that became ultra controversial once people found out it was not going to include every Pokemon creature that existed up to that point, staining the franchise's reputation for the foreseeable future. I feel like Sonic is facing a similar thing, where people are exceptionally skeptical of it because of factors outside of the game's qualities themselves. I gotta wonder how many people were, quote, cautiously optimistic about it because of what they were seeing of the game itself versus what they come to expect or even wanted to expect from Sonic. As much as, in the past, the dark ages of Sonic actually are, it's still normal, it's still status quo to be negative about the series. It's the cool opinion the funny YouTube men have, right? You'd be surprised at how many people I know who say they don't like it even though they haven't even played it. They just got their opinion from some funny dude online or something. Or think it's bad because, you know, it's Sonic. Now, one thing I've seen very little controversy about is the story and writing of this game. That's like unanimously the one thing people like about it. The game was penned by beloved Sonic comics author Ian Flynn, and it shows. While some of the 2000s games went a little overboard with it and were just generally not very well written, Sonic 06, fans were missing the more serious, self-assured style of writing from that era. Want it or not, over time that became part of the series' identity and legacy. Cool anime-inspired stories are Sonic, and regressing to what feels like almost a parody of itself in colors and its subsequent releases really wasn't the best move in the long run. From the very beginning, Sonic has always tried to stay on the cutting edge. Even the classic games tried to tell the best stories they possibly could with the resources they had. It wasn't until the 2010s that it really started trying to settle for less. So it's really freaking cathartic to finally see these characters act like themselves again. Not just that, it feels like they're growing. Sonic can be a rebellious badass with a heart of gold, Tails can have agency again, and Knuckles can be, well, anything but a complete idiot. Speaking of, Knuckles starred in his very own Prologue animation short for this game. And while it's not necessary at all for understanding the story, it's awesome! And I very much recommend y'all to watch it if you haven't. It's free on YouTube and only a few minutes long. But not only are these characters themselves again, They are actually growing! They use their writing inconsistency in Sonic Forces as a device to fuel Tails' development, away from just being Sonic's sidekick. Amy is no longer just an obnoxious fangirl. She actually wants to help out, and is a genuinely loving person Sonic seems to finally respect. Knuckles is starting to feel burdened by his role as the guardian of the Master Emerald. Yes, they finally remembered that! They respect the series' story and lore. References to previous games are plentiful, and coming from the last decade, that is such a delight. Even Eggman talking about Maria in that one voice log actually got me kind of emotional. In general, the game has this theme of looking proudly into the past, but moving on to a new era. Basically, all the main characters are figuring out new future stages of their lives. Even Eggman goes through some stuff we're going to talk about soon enough. One of this game's ending themes, One Way Dream, reflects this idea very strongly. Of looking ahead into the bright future, starting over and stepping onto a new frontier. And in a lot of ways, I feel like this reflects the state of the game and Sonic Team as a whole. From many interviews and the like, as well as how the game itself turned out and how long it took to be developed, the dev team was putting their all into making it as great as it could possibly be, and basically starting a new era for the series. This is a new dawn for the Sonic franchise, and I, for one, couldn't be more excited about it. But, well, we've been in the Three Titans the story was going on about, but there's still clearly more space in the island completion screen. Plus, I'm pretty sure the game advertised itself as having 5 of them. No? Alright. Welcome to Rhea Island, the second to last one in Sonic Frontiers, and the beginning of the endgame. For some reason, it looks just like Chronos Island, but I'm sure there's nothing wrong going on here, right? Right? This one's structured a bit differently from the rest. It's mostly there to build up the finale, really. You have to climb these huge towers scattered around the map. Each of them is basically its own Sonic level. And they're the most fun platforming challenges in the whole game. They're fairly tough for Frontier standards, but if you fall down, there's always the chance you could try to drop onto somewhere in the middle of the climb and quickly get back to where you were. There's no real death punishment here, but tie the trickiness of the platforming with the epic orchestral music that accompanies this island, and you get a sequence that truly feels cinematic. What can I say? It's just epic. On the top of each tower, you get to see more of this ancient civilization the game has been building up. Turns out it consisted of aliens, and the Chaos Emeralds were their energy source. They brought them along to Earth once their planet was destroyed by this nameless being of seemingly unlimited power. Oh, we've got ourselves a final boss, alright! Also, I just want to mention, is it just me or these scenes give off major 2000s action cartoon vibes? Feels right out of Ben 10, TMNT 2003, or Teen Titans. Not a bad thing, mind you. This tone works great for Sonic. Just mentioning, that's all. As you climb each tower, cyber corruption takes over Sonic more and more. That's a thing I neglected to mention, but he's been dealing with this for the entire game. And it's a really cool way to challenge his usually very optimistic character. These two lines in particular always get to me.
Be careful.
Careful? Where's the fun in that?
Be careful.
Careful? Where's the fun in that?
Anyway, personally, I really like how they added to the lore in this island. It's coherent and respectful to the previous games, with the whole connection to chaos and stuff, while also introducing some juicy new info for us fans to chew on. For us Sonic lore masters, this is seriously some game-changing stuff. Finding out more about the Chaos Emeralds and their origin is seriously kinda nuts. From the insanely badass Titan bosses to this, it's genuinely kinda hard to believe this is like actually a real Sonic game that came out in 2022. It does some awesome things that I would never expect current day Sega to do with the series. But heck, this is one crazy dream I don't want to wake up from. Anyway, let's check out how Sonic's doing. Oh. Is he dead? Well, wouldn't be the first time this happened, but no, he's just stuck between realities. Arguably a fate worse than it, but technically not quite death. Anyway, his friends quickly push themselves back into the cyber realm to revert Sonic back to his usual state. A bit anticlimactic, but I'm sure this was the plan from the start, right? In all seriousness though, something else here would have added a lot to the scene. Maybe you have a sequence where you quickly play as the other characters to save Sonic from his effective death? Kinda like Chrono Trigger? This isn't the only moment in the story that feels kinda rushed. Sage has an, on paper, phenomenal character arc alongside Eggman, where they both start trusting each other and seeing themselves as father and daughter. But that is never properly communicated in the main story. There is this one scene where they try to go all emotional with the sad music and everything, but it kinda falls flat on its face, reusing some very basic scenes that we saw not long before as flashbacks to justify Sage's attachment to the Doctor. Aside from that, the only way to get their full story is through the Eggman voice logs unlocked by playing Big's fishing minigame. And I mean, it's alright, the minigame itself is stupid simple, but the vibes are chill and the rewards are worth it. The voice logs themselves are pretty great, letting us see Eggman's perspective on the whole situation and give us some pretty deep cut lore references. But it still feels like they weren't necessarily meant to be presented this way. Like there's something missing here. But hey, details schmeetails. We're off to the last island. I'm sure they prepared something sweet and original for it. What? What? This is just Chronos Island again! Even the memory tokens look the same! Let's face it, this game was rushed and it shows. If you look into the game's files, you'll see that Chronos, Rhea, and the final island, Oranos, were originally just one big map that was divided into 3. Even the Eggman voice logs treat it as just one big island. Originally the 4th island was supposed to take place on an ancient space arc of some kind. Honestly, it kinda feels wrong to even say this game has 5 total islands. It's effectively more like 3 or 4 depending on how you count it. And you can really see how they were running out of time by this point. This time, all the Chaos Emeralds are just scattered throughout the map, and there's very little actual story progression in Oranos. And unlike the other islands, Oranos only has a single musical theme instead of the progressing one they have for all the other main islands. Which, by the way, all sound really good as well. Did I mention this game has a good soundtrack? But the biggest offender is, no doubt, the final boss. The final Titan is definitely still cool, but it's for sure the most underwhelming out of the 4. I actually had a bit of trouble with it on my first playthrough, but that's because unlike the other Titans, there's no climb sequence before the boss, so when I died, it just brought me back to the start of battle with less than enough rings to beat it, giving me no opportunity to recharge. But once you come back with more rings, this boss is such a breeze. It doesn't even last long enough for the vocals in the banger theme songs to kick in properly. It's kinda pathetic, really. And if you're playing on easy or normal mode, that's kinda it. You beat it, and then there's this QTE, and you're done, game over. But if you're playing on hard, which you most certainly should do, you get the true final boss. You get to find the creature of unimaginable power that destroyed the Ancients' planet. The personification of death itself. The all-consuming void. The end. And it's a simple ship minigame like the ones you've played many times in the game's multiple hacking sequences. It's a cool payoff, and as a Kirby fan, I can't deny a shmup final boss conceptually. But god, does this feel rushed. Just from Sonic's dialogue right before the fight, you can tell they were planning to do more of this. Plus, even the Kirby ones felt more climactic, had some great production value. This just feels sorta cheap. The tutorial box says you have to work with the Titans, plural. But in reality, you're just controlling the final one, which is being commanded by a now-reformed sage. Like, jeez, in a game with so many phenomenal battles, why does the one against the literal strongest creature in the Sonic universe have to be so... basic? If you read up on some developer interviews, you get confirmation on all that we've been speculating on. Basically, the whole latter part of the game was kinda rushed. The thing is, despite the ample development time, the devs spent a lot of time in trial and error formulating the game's basic structure. It went through unusually rigorous playtesting to make sure it was good. And that actually explains a lot of the little issues of this game. I'm 90% sure the parry was originally meant to last for a smaller window of time, but someone in the focus test didn't like that, so they changed it the way it is now. Despite all of that, the devs still say they're proud of the game they created. And you know, playing through this boss fight for a second time, knowing what to expect, it's kinda grown on me. You can see it as just a cheap rush job if you want to, but you can also see it for all the artistic intent that went into it. This boss fight is actually pretty fun and challenging, but on top of that, it also has this beautiful music and one of the best villain monologues I've ever seen. This battle is the thematic apex of the game. It's the conclusion of Sage's character arc, as both she and Sonic face the living image of finality, of giving up, of stopping, of letting go of the one-way dream that keeps us fighting each day. If this game is about getting up stronger in the face of adversity, forging new frontiers and keeping the flame alive for years to come, if it's about rebirth, then the end is about death. It's the perfect thematic antithesis to the whole game. And as I finally beat it again and saw Sage's final sacrifice, I couldn't help but get a little emotional. When the credits started rolling, and Robotnik grasped onto the memory of his beloved daughter, the only sentence that could run through my head was, "What an amazing game, man." This final boss fight is Sonic Frontiers in a nutshell. It's both an artistic disaster and a phenomenal masterpiece. A thing that was rushed out the door to meet demands and the result of the blood, sweat, tears, and most importantly, unrestrained passion of the developers. So I ask you again, why do you play video games? Because depending on your answer, you might see Sonic Frontiers as a structural mess, with an unfinished storyline, janky controls, distracting pop-in, convoluted progression, and a disappointing final act. But if you're like me, you might see it as the most fun Sonic game in forever, with one of the best soundtracks ever composed, a superbly written story, amazing boss fights, tight controls, and fun combat while also being an unforgettable adventure you'll treasure and revisit for years to come. One that, either way, is just the beginning of a very bright future for Sonic. After all, now that they have the structure down, they can focus on making a more complete game around it next time. And as I was writing this video, they even announced free DLC for this game, with a new story and extra playable characters. We stay winning, Sonic fans. The post-credit scenes hint at a potential sequel, or maybe it was just for the DLC, I don't know, and I can't wait to see what they do with that. My personal suggestion is to introduce urban environments into the open zone structure. Running around as Sonic in a huge open city sounds like the most fun thing ever to me. Either way, I hope to see all of you at the other side of these new, uncharted frontiers. Catch you later!